Hey guys, so getting a bit of a later start today because I did my equivalent of sleeping in, which means that I was in bed until 7:30. Yeah, I got a bit more sleep last night, which is good. I'm still not fully recuperated from the sleep deprivation of the night before, but I'm feeling okay. Yeah, as I said yesterday, I will be working on reading Lolita in Tehran. I'll be reading from the Isaiah Berlin. I will be reading, hopefully, The Life of Wagner and the Lives of the Great Composers. And then to fill out the 200 pages for Saturday and Sunday, I have three other books that I might pick from. One of them is this, Bubbles, a Self-Portrait by Beverly Sills, which is an autobiography by Beverly Sills, obviously, who was an opera singer, and this is just her memoir full of anecdotes about the opera world and photos of the opera world, which sounds like it should be fun. And then the other two I have, one is a reread that I've been thinking of rereading for quite some time, and because it's a reread, I think it should go by quickly, but it's a really interesting book. It's The Human Use of Human Beings, Cybernetics and Society by Norbert Wiener, which is just about where Norbert Wiener thinks that technology and the growing role of technology in our lives is taking society. And it was published back in the 1950s. And from what I can remember, I found it incredibly thought-provoking and also prophetic. That there's that. And, it's not exactly the lightest reading, but again, this will be my third time reading it, so, it should go by quicker, and it's not that, it's only 180 pages. And the other thing I grabbed as a possibility was, this, by Rene Descartes, but I think I would so this is a volume that has Discourse on Method and the Meditations, and what I'm thinking is I would just read the Meditations, because I've read the Discourse on Method before, and I do want to reread it, but, since I'm in a readathon, reading both of them in succession might be a bit much, but anyway, we'll see. So, I'll see you guys later. Hey guys, it's now about 9:30, and I just read the biography of Wagner in The Lives of the Great Composers by Harold Schoenberg. I really enjoyed it. I really think Harold Schoenberg does a great job of covering a lot of ground in a short space. The biography of Wagner is only 21 pages, and I think the biography of Bach was only also only 21 pages. But he still manages to really bring the character to life and bring to life their sort of musical influence, and to give some, good discussions of the music that they wrote. Whenever anyone talks about Wagner, they of course talk about the influence of Tristan and Isolde, which he does, and they talk about the Ring cycle and how monumental that was. But he also touches on how Wagner was actually a very influential conductor. It sounds, based on what Schoenberg says, that Wagner had a huge impact on the method of conducting in Europe in the last third or so of the 19th century, and maybe the early 20th century. And he had this method of using sort of idiosyncratic rhythms or something. I can't quite do justice to it. But he had this huge influence on conducting, which hasn't gone on to transfer into the 20th or the 21st century. But I didn't know that, so that was super interesting. But yeah, anyway, I just enjoyed it as just another nice overview of Wagner's life. After reading these two books and one short biography of Wagner, I feel like next year I'll be prepared to read Ernest Newman's biography of him, Wagner as Man and Artist. So you'll be hearing about that. But first I would like to get around to listening to or watching the rest of the Wagner operas that I haven't yet seen or listened to. So that means Parsifal, The Flying Dutchman, and The Master Singers of Nuremberg. The Flying Dutchman I'm going to be going to a live broadcast of early next year. Well, March, okay, so not that early next year, but sometime next year. And then Parsifal and The Master Singers, I'll find the time to do it. But anyway, I think I'm going to move on and finish the essay in the Isaiah Berlin that I was reading, and then we'll see where I go from there. Hey guys, so as you can see, I still haven't changed out of my shirt that I was wearing yesterday. That's how I am on weekends. But I have read 20 pages of reading Lolita in Tehran, but I don't have much else to add at this point. But more importantly, I have finished reading the Purgatorio in the Divine Comedy. So 2/3 of the way through my second reading of the Divine Comedy. The first time I read it, I actually thought that the Purgatorio was more interesting than the Inferno in many ways. I think that the Inferno probably gets the most attention because I think humans have a weird obsession with eternal punishment, and I don't know, maybe everyone sort of subliminally or subconsciously thinks that they're going to the Inferno after they die or something like that. But I do find the Inferno interesting because of how the way that each the punishment for each sin sort of has something more philosophical to say about the nature of the sin that's being punished, which I always find pretty interesting. And I guess the same is true for the Purgatorio, but the Purgatorio seems to be more allegorical. It seems to have a lot more sort of symbols throughout it, just random things that happen, like dreams that Dante has throughout it, and like this weird procession in the very end when he reaches the earthly paradise. There's this weird procession of a chariot being pulled by a griffin, and then the chariot is attacked by an eagle, and the eagle is supposed to be a symbol of Rome, and then and then a fox, that it's the emaciated fox that represents heresy, comes along and tries to approach the chariot, but then Beatrice chases the fox away, and then the eagle sort of mysteriously bursts into nowhere, but its feathers remain and litter the chariot, and the chariot is a symbol of the church, and the eagle is a symbol of Rome, so this is a sign that the church has taken on the power of the Roman Empire. But then, like, heads start to sprout from the feathers, and the chariot becomes this weird, grotesque creature before being attacked by a dragon's tail that emerges up through a crack in the ground, and getting impaled by that tail. It's just, there's some weird stuff going on in the Purgatorio, and I like it. I actually marked off a lot more passages in the Purgatorio than the Inferno, and that's usually a sign that I am finding more of it more aesthetically pleasing, I suppose. But the Inferno is more fun. I mean, again, it's like we kind of have fun talking about and looking at punishment, and I don't know why, but we humans are weird like that. But yeah, so anyway, moving on to the Paradiso. The Paradiso I remember being rather boring, but I only have to read one canto per day of it in order to finish it by the end of the year, so that shouldn't be too much of a problem. But yeah, anyway, so if any of you have thoughts on the Divine Comedy, then let me know, because you know, it's a book I hope to keep sort of rereading every now and again throughout my life. So anyway, that is my update for now. I have also read my 10 pages in the Isaiah Berlin essay, but I'll talk about that when I finish it. I think I'll try to keep working on reading Lolita in Tehran, and we'll see what happens. Hey guys, so it's just about 3:15. I've read 20 more pages of reading Lolita in Tehran. It's going by slowly, not in a bad way. Definitely, I am really liking it, but I just find myself compelled to take it relatively slowly and not rush through it, which kind of makes it not the best pick for a readathon like this. But I have about 120 pages left. So if I manage to read 40 more pages today, which I may or may not be able to do. I may be able to read 20 more pages today, maybe not 40. Then I could get to page 240, and that means I would read 100 pages tomorrow, which wouldn't be that hard, I don't think. Especially if I make a point of finishing up that Azar Berlin essay and don't read anything else tomorrow. I'll just maybe finish this tomorrow and just have that be tomorrow's reading, and that's all. Except for my cantos in the Divine Comedy. But, you know, that takes like 10 minutes. But anyway, I wanted to give you a little update now, just because I'm not sure how much more I'm going to be checking in, because, you know, even though I got better sleep last night, I'm still a little tired, and I also just kind of want to do some things other than reading. Actually, you know, I want to watch BookTube, I want to just chill out, I don't know. I haven't done much just sort of unwinding, which, you know, for me, reading isn't exactly unwinding in my sense of the word of just relaxing, because when I'm reading, I'm working mentally, or at least that's how I feel. I rarely read simply for enjoyment, and like a lot of the books I read aren't exactly, you know, the most enjoyable stuff. So I haven't quite gotten as much opportunity as I might normally like on a vacation like this to just sort of unwind like that. So I may read 20 more pages of this and then just call it a day with reading. But anyway, we'll see what happens. You'll obviously find out. But I something that's really coming through in reading Lolita is something that I love is she gives really touching portraits of her students. She, you know, just, you know, all these, most of them are women, but some of them are men as well. But in particular, the women are very poignant, because they're, you know, they're shoved into this difficult situation where they're sort of expected to be these meek, passive receptacles for what men tell them to do. But they're trying to get an education, which is kind of the antithesis of that in some ways. At the same time, you have the authorities trying to control what the professors can actually teach. But, you know, she just finished talking about one particular student, whose name is Razia, I believe. Razier. And Razier was this really interesting person who loved Henry James. And but what the really great anecdote that Nafisi gives about her is that there was one particular exam that Nafisi gave where, and the exam, I can't remember if the exam was on Henry James, but it was, I don't think it's important, but the exam was in one of her literature classes, and basically all the students, or many of the students, not all of them, but many of them, in their answers to her essay questions, just sort of reproduced her lectures, almost word for word. Rather than giving an individualized answer to her essay questions. You know, they literally, their idea of what the professors wanted from them was to just memorize everything the professor had said word for word and regurgitate it. That's what they had been raised to think education was, basically. And you can kind of see how that mentality would come out of being raised in a totalitarian regime like the theocracy in Iran, and Nafisi was livid with the students for this, and she lost her temper with them, actually, when she handed the exams back. And Razier, actually, after class that day, when Nafisi lost her temper, because Nafisi, obviously, she wanted them to, you know, express their individual ideas, think critically, etc., obviously. And Razier approached her, and like, it just said outright that she was really disappointed with Azar Nafisi, that she thought she had done precisely the wrong thing in yelling at them in that way. Sorry, I just heard a door open in one of my neighbors, and I get self-conscious. She had dealt with it in precisely the wrong way, because she'd missed an opportunity to teach these students how not to view that as education, right? And she'd squandered it by just sort of yelling at them and possibly making them, self-conscious and maybe sort of hurting their self-esteem or self-efficacy in terms of their ability to go forward with their education and to be someone like Nafisi, who a lot of the students idolized. She was really well liked by her students. So I loved that anecdote. There are others, though. A lot of male students who are a bit more hardline Muslim, maybe not hardline, but who are much more confrontational with Nafisi, but still sort of respectful, which is, I find, really an interesting dynamic that she talks about. So I'm still liking it. And another thing that came out to me today was a sort of connection between some of the events that Nafisi reports and Karen Armstrong's book, The Battle for God. Now, at the point where Nafisi is in her narrative in this book, the Iran-Iraq war has been going on for like 8 years or something like that. And she talks about the human wave attacks that Iran would use against Iraq, where, hundreds or thousands of basically young boys between, as she says, 10 and 16, or old men, would just eliminate minefields by charging at them. And she talks about, and she also talks about how the regime of Khomeini would, refuse to, come to an agreement with Iraq and end the war. Iraq at that point was actually hoping to, settle a peace agreement, because Iran had scored some victories against them. But the Iranian regime refused to, because they wanted to capture Karbala, which was a holy city in Shia Islam, where one of their imams had been martyred in their past. And she also sort of talks about the ideology of these people, of like these young boys and these old men who went in these human waves. They weren't forced into it. They went into it because they thought that they were martyrs. And something she said really struck me. She says that, so she talks about sort of propaganda on the television and radio, encouraging young men to martyr themselves. And she says, the recurrent image in those days was that of an elderly, bearded, turbaned man calling for unceasing jihad to an audience of adolescent boys with red martyrs bands stretched across their foreheads. These were the dwindling remainders of a once vast group of young people who had been mobilized by the excitement of carrying real guns and the promise of keys to a heaven where they could finally enjoy all the pleasures from which they had abstained in life. Theirs was a world in which defeat was impossible, hence compromise meaningless. Karen Armstrong in her book talks a lot about how when you start to apply sort of ideas that are meant to be kind of not taken literally, that are meant to be sort of that are meant to be sort of myths, not really to be taken literally, or you take the doctrines of religion and try to start applying them to politics or to war, they just make no sense. And you can kind of see here with Iran refusing to end the war with these human waves and propaganda and such. And especially that last sentence, theirs was a world in which defeat was impossible, hence compromise meaningless. In that as well, you can see how the kind of influence on religion on politics or war is just incredibly toxic, in the sense that it encourages this unrealistic attitude where we're going to continue this jihad endlessly, which is just a recipe for thousands of people dying senselessly. and to have a war going on forever. So I noticed that as well. I think another part of the reason that this book is going by slowly is because the subject matter is so heavy. As what I've talked about might be indicating, it is not exactly a happy book. So that might also be why it's going slowly. Anyway, so I'll sign up for now, and we'll see where I get to later today. Hey guys, so I have, I didn't really get much more reading done in, reading Lolita in Tehran, sorry. Just adjusting the lighting there. I'm a little tired. I feel like, I'm just a little bit too tired to read this book. I don't know. I'll hopefully be more well-rested tomorrow and be able to work on this more. I got to page 225, and I started at page 180. So that's not terrible, but anyway. I will try to finish this tomorrow. It will be the only thing that I read tomorrow, okay? So you might just get one vlog from me about, with a sort of review of the book as a whole. My Divine Comedy reading, I'm supposed to be reading some of it tomorrow, but I'll just make up the difference throughout December. There are 33, I'm done with Purgatorio, I only have the Paradiso to read, and if I skip tomorrow, that'll leave 30 days in a month to read 33 cantos. It'll be easy enough. So tomorrow will just be devoted to Nafisi's book, and maybe I'll read some poetry or something. But anyway, I can just hit the ground running tomorrow morning if I get if I am well rested tonight, which I should be, hopefully. But I did finish finally the essay in the Isaiah Berlin volume, The Concept of Scientific History. Basically Isaiah Berlin comes to the conclusion that history isn't a science, which I think, when I asked the question to you all on Wednesday or whenever it was, you all kind of agreed with that basic conclusion that it isn't a history, or that it isn't a science. But that's not to its detriment. I know a few people who are sort of subscribe to scientism. I almost said they're scientists, but that's not what I mean. They're not practicing scientists like I am. They subscribe to scientism, where they act as though science is the only, like, if something isn't a science, if some field isn't a science, then it must be dumb or irrelevant. I don't agree with that at all. Obviously we have history, we have literature, philosophy, etc. But anyway, Isaiah Berlin comes to the conclusion that history is not a science. And I feel like he could have made his argument for why that is in a much shorter space. I feel like he repeated himself a lot in this essay, which wasn't terrible. I mean, there are worse things, but still, I feel like the essay could have at least been like a third as long. But anyway, basically, history is different from sciences because it requires us to put ourselves in the shoes of people in the past. We have to know the historical context and the historical moment and location and people that we're studying well enough to be able to imagine ourselves in their position. It takes a certain level of human empathy that science doesn't. He says, to study physics, you don't need to put yourself in the shoes of Isaac Newton. You just need to know these general principles of physics that have been generally tested and supported. And general principles is another thing. Science is based on general principles, on theories and hypotheses, and there have been attempts to come up with sort of general theories of history. Hegel had one, Marx had one, but they generally they might explain a few isolated incidents pretty well, but they generally start to break down pretty quickly, just because humans in all of their complexity are so different at different points in time and different locations and among different cultures that any general principle will tend to break down pretty quickly. And he also just makes this other point, which I thought was kind of interesting, is that one thing that's very important to history that isn't actually as important to science is just general sort of common sense and such sort of a general sort of perception of just how humans function. He says something like that. You would be ludicrous to argue that that Shakespeare lived and wrote before Dante, and you would be crazy to argue that no, we don't live on Earth, we live on Mars, or that Napoleon didn't exist. Facts like that, sort of just general premises that we sort of intuitively just accept, are premises that in a science, the equivalent of those in a science, you would have to find some sort of real support for, right? But in history, we just kind of accept them because it's just pragmatic for us to accept them, because without accepting rules like that, we can't really move forward at all. So yeah, when we say, another really interesting point that he makes, I think, is that in history, when you say so and so did this because XYZ, or here's a fact, therefore ABC, those becauses and those therefores, again, in a science, you would need some general principle to tell you why that's the case. Whatever it is, the theory of relativity or the second law of thermodynamics or something. But in history, it's not a general law. It's just, well, this makes sense based on what I know about this particular historical figure or this particular society that I'm studying. It's all much more particular to different areas. And so, yeah, he comes to the conclusion that history isn't a science, and yeah. So I thought it was interesting. I don't know if I'm the biggest fan of Isaiah Berlin's writing, but I really like his thinking. So I definitely want to try to read. I want to read this whole volume now, at some point. Not this year, but at some point. Anyway, I'm not going to read anymore tonight. I'm just going to relax. Like I said, I think I just need to unwind a little bit, and I'll be recharged tomorrow morning to finish my last day. I thought I would talk about a few other things just in the meantime, if you guys find it interesting. The first of those is that before the year is out, I want to reread one more book, and I want it to be a piece of fiction. I've reread, I think, something like 18 or 19 books this year. I'm not sure if The Divine Comedy will make it 20. I'm not sure. But anyway, it's something in the high teens, which for me is a really good rereading year. But I want to reread one more piece of fiction. And I have a few choices to pick from. I'm not sure which one I want to go with yet. So I thought that I would let you guys know what I'm considering, and sort of ask you just to sort of let me know which you think might be cool. Maybe which book might you be most interested in hearing me talk about. So the books I'm thinking of are Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky, The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, however you pronounce his name, Endgame by Samuel Beckett, The Tempest by William Shakespeare, Paradise Lost by John Milton, To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, or Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, and The Children of Hurin by J.R.R. Tolkien. So let me know what you think, which one you might like to hear me talk about. And then another thing I thought I would touch on briefly is that Samuel Durham tagged me in the top 5 nonfiction books that you read in 2019 tag. And I was planning to do a top 5 nonfiction books of 2019 anyway, but I was planning to do it at the end of the year. But Samuel tagged me a couple weeks ago. I did let him know that I was going to wait till the end of Nonfiction November, because I was obviously going to read a lot of nonfiction in Nonfiction November. But I think I feel pretty secure doing that video early in December, because December, I think I want to be a primarily fiction month for me. Again, like I said, I have so little fiction this year that I want to squeeze in some in December. And again, reading Lolita and Tehran is actually a great way to get me into wanting to read more fiction in December. So I won't be reading much or any nonfiction in December. The only thing that I will be reading of nonfiction in December that I know will be the Journals of Lewis and Clark. I'm actually buddy reading the Journals of Lewis and Clark with my brother. We're both gonna read it, and we're gonna do a video about that book together when we're together over Christmas break. So look out for that video. But this is all a very roundabout way for me to get to my point, which is that I am trying to formulate how I'm going to rank my books. I want to rank them. I have a hard time with rankings, as I think many of us bookish people do, but I want to try. I do find it interesting, an interesting process. And so the system I have in mind right now for judging nonfiction and ranking it is that I have 4 categories to rate each book on. So we have the writing, quality of the writing. We have the insight that I gained from it. How much did I learn from it? Emotional impact. Now, emotional impact is not something that I really tend to go to nonfiction for. So I would rate writing and insight on a scale from 1 to 10. But I think for emotional impact, what I would do is I would just add 1 point, 1 extra point if it hasn't had an emotional impact, rather than adding in a whole nother category where I rate it 1 to 10. Because there are some nonfiction books that I love and that really teach me a lot and that I really enjoy, but that don't really have any emotional impact and aren't really supposed to. I mean, like when I was reading The Battle for God by Karen Armstrong. Really fascinating book, but no real emotional reaction other than occasionally getting a little angry about religious fundamentalists being idiots. But yeah, so the emotional side would be weighted a lot less than the others. And then lastly is just an overall assessment, because it's just sort of a holistic judgment of overall what do I think of this book. Very subjective, as you might guess from that. And then that would also be rated on 1 to 10. And then I would combine all of those, and each book would get a score, and then I would just take the top 5, and those would be my top 5. And by the way, I would not be rating every single nonfiction book that I read this year, because that would be a lot. But I have a list that I've drawn up that I'm not going to show you yet because I don't want spoilers, but I have a list of about 10 books that are contenders, and so I would take each of those books and rate them on this framework, and then that would turn into my top 5. And however many don't make it into the top 5, I would probably mention quickly at the beginning as honorable mentions. So yeah, what do you guys think of that rating system? I mean, I'm just curious what you guys think of it. I mean, does it sound good, foolproof? Anything you would change about it? I don't know. So I'm having fun doing that. I did sort of do an impromptu ranking yesterday with that system, but I'm gonna do it more systematically. I think maybe I'll do it tonight, but maybe also later in the week or something. But because I want to pull down all those books that are contenders and look through them, look at what I underlined, what I marked off, what I dog-eared, to see which parts of it really impacted me, and really see, remind myself of of what the book did for me, so that I'm giving each book a really fair assessment. Yeah. Anyway, so that's my reading day. A little bit, another shorter vlog, I think, just like yesterday. Although I don't know, sometimes I've thought that these vlogs were going to be short, and then they've turned out to be a half-hour long, so maybe this will be another half-hour one, or maybe it will be shorter. But anyway, I will sign off for the evening, and I will talk to you tomorrow. So, bye guys.